Welcome to another episode of Preparing for the Unexpected. I'm your host, Alex Fullick, and today we'll be talking about more things that are business continuity and disaster recovery related. Today we're going to touch base on 12 things not to include in your business continuity or disaster recovery or emergency response plan. Now, as I go through this list, I will have some qualifiers as to why I believe some of these items shouldn't be there. And that's coming from over 20 years of experience of running into different plans. Some are these massive binders, with 1,000 pages in it, and others, are these thin, action-based plans. And really, that's what they should be. All our plans should be action-focused. I tend to have a rule of thumb that if you can't get to your first action within the first couple of pages, you're going to run into problems. And that includes having a table of contents, your cover page, your table of contents, and then on page one, you're just going straight into it. Who's doing what, when, where, and why. Other times, and I'm sure many of you encountered this, you'll open up one of these massive binders, thinking that, wow, it's just full of, amazing information, things I can use, and I know this is going to be a fantastic plan. And you're on page 40 and still not finding an action. You're on page 50 and it's still nothing there. I've actually had my hands on a plan written by a company, and it was chock full of all this wonderful information, some of the stuff that I'm actually going to go through today. And you couldn't do anything or find an actual action until it was almost page 100, and it was over 200 pages long. Then when I got to the first actions, there was more of the same repetitive information. And really it turned out that all the fluff, like I like to call the fluff information, was greater than the actual action-oriented steps that you need, to use when a disaster occurs or a crisis, or you have a problem or an issue, anything that you're dealing with. These plans were just massive, but the actual usable information was very small and minute. It was just not worth it. And you don't want that, and you don't want people to start flipping through pages trying to find out what it is they need to do. And, where do I start? Where does this start? It becomes no value. And after a while, that binder just gets moved off to the side and people start trying to come up with their own things. Okay, this is what I think I need to do, because they're thinking action oriented, but the document's not. It's not providing it. And this isn't just, Word documents or Excel files or things in PowerPoints, something that's printed. This is the same type of thing if you have an online application that you're using too. When you hit print and or view or whatever it is you're clicking to see what it is I need to do, you don't want all this other fluff information to get in the way of what you're doing. You want to be able to get right to the point and say, this is my first step. Step one, thou shalt do this. Whatever it may be, whether it be, public relations or crisis communications or, a plan that a department has to implement because, their systems are down. So there's things they need to work on right away, manual processes and manual checks, or start faxing information. Or if you're rebuilding an IT system, an application or a mainframe or, a server, you want to be able to get straight to the actions. So I've got a list here, and I had, I can't remember actually which book I put this in, but I think it's in either the last one, Watch Your Step, or it's in one of the two volumes that I have on Made Again, called Made Again, sorry. And it's 12 things not to include in your BCM DR plan. Now, before I get started, I also want to clarify that I'm a strong believer of still having a lot of this information available, just not in the action plan. I tend to like to create what I call a program overview document, which can be large, which is fine because it's got all of this information that I'm going to go through in there, and keeping that off to the side as kind of the overarching document. This is our program. This is what it contains. And then underneath that, you've got your action documents, how you build your technology, how your crisis management plan works, how you activate your disaster teams and the roles and responsibilities within those various teams. So a lot of times I'm going to refer to that overarching business continuity management or disaster program overview document, whatever you want to call it. It's the one that kind of sits above everything. This is our program. Okay? So let's start. We'll go through our list of 12 things not to include in your business continuity disaster recovery plan. And again, these are the action plans that people are going to open up and start using. Number 1, distribution lists. Now, I know already some people are out there going, what? We need to know where these plans are and blah, 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 blah. That's different. Knowing where a copy of a plan is kept, either online, off-site, in a lockbox, on somebody's shelf, that's different than the name of someone who gets a copy of the plan. Names change. A copy went to Bob and Sally. Sally transferred somewhere else, and Bob left the company a year ago. What good is that distribution list? But saying a copy is in this lockbox, it's off-site at this location, it's kept online at this URL. That's different. So let's make sure that there's a distinguishing point there. You don't want a list of, 50 different people who've either reviewed or looked at it or has a copy somewhere, sitting anywhere, who knows where it could be. You can give directions to people, keep a copy in your car, keep a copy at home, or keep a copy on your bookshelf, or, on your phone, or on this USB key, anything like that. You just don't want that big, long list. It adds absolutely no value, okay? That's some of the information you may want to keep in the overarching document. Here's who gets all these plans. And it doesn't mean that everyone gets all the plans. If Jim gets a copy of the IT disaster recovery plan, Jim may not be the same person who gets a copy of the crisis management plan. So you may want to keep those separate. I have seen in plans where that entire list, all the plans, are in every single plan. So if you have, we'll just throw a number out there, 10 different plans, one for crisis management, one for IT restoration, one for business continuity plans, one for emergency response, etc. The same distribution lists are in every single one. So if you have to update that list, you're updating all of a sudden 10 plans. If you keep all those distribution lists in the central location, off-site, in the overarching document, you're only updating the list once. So, number 1, don't incorporate distribution lists in your business continuity plans. Number 2, methodology. A user is not going to care how you came about developing your plans. They're not going to care if you sat through the steps outlined by any of the business continuity or disaster recovery organizations. The user is not going to care. They're not going to care that you may have followed project management 101, either a waterfall approach, where something finishes before something starts, or an agile approach where something gets maybe 25% of the way through, and then you start something else, to reduce the timelines. Or they're not going to care about that, right? That's not action oriented. That again is information that would offer value, especially when people want to audit or governance or anything along those lines, or if you're seeking a standard certification. That information would be fantastic in these overarching documents again, in the big program overview document. But a user's not going to care what the methodology is, how you did it. So don't include it. It adds no value to them. They want the action. They don't care that you sat through to learn how agile project management works and then used it to create these plans. Whoopie-doo. For a user, it doesn't matter. So number 2, don't include methodology that you utilized to create these plans. Number 3, program assumptions. Now, I want to clarify here with assumptions because I think just like distribution lists, people are out there saying, what? We need to know assumptions, they should be in there, blah, blah, blah. Well, there's 2 points to that. You have your program assumptions, when you created the overall program and the various components, right? We assume that we have funding from corporate, whoever that may be, finance or IT or someone else. You may have an assumption along those lines, or that you have buy-in from the IT vice president, or the finance vice president, or the marketing vice president, or the program has a seat at the C-level table when they meet on their schedule. That's a program level assumption. Those don't need to be in the action documents. If you do have an assumption in these action-oriented plans, you want assumptions to be based on the action plan itself. So, as an example, if I am to, let's say, rebuild the mainframe, from tape, as an example. I don't think tons of people do that anymore because there's so many other different options, but that's one option because it's a good example. My assumption may be, when I get to a certain point, that whoever is responsible for ordering these tapes from my offsite provider, storage provider, or wherever they're kept, has been done, and the tapes are either on their way or they've already been checked, arrived and been checked by the appropriate group so that I can start my plan. That assumption is based on my action-oriented plan. That's different than the other assumptions I mentioned. The other assumptions can be in that big overview document again, but assumptions related to the actions, those should be in your plan. Otherwise, what happens? You will assume, and what they say, you will make a you-know-what out of you and me. So assumptions attributed to the actions, yes, should be in these plans. But be careful, some people may want you to add all this other stuff that doesn't need to be there. You don't need to add assumptions that have nothing to do with the actions being taken. If you have an assumption about a marketing vice president, that doesn't need to be in the IT disaster recovery plan, unless that marketing executive is doing something in that IT plan. If they don't need to be there. Okay? So that's number three. Don't include program level assumptions. Only include the assumptions that are related to the actions in the action plan. Number 4, meetings and meeting schedules and who attended these meetings. Really, who cares? I don't. I've seen a plan that had every single meeting listed, that had every attendee and the agendas for each one. That added no value. Even in an appendices, it adds no value. Who cares? You sit in the meetings and you came up with your contingencies, you got your decisions, or whatever the case may be, whatever the topic was. But that adds no value to the action plan. Again, that information still adds value because it helps with your methodology and how you develop these plans. So that's something you want to keep off to the side, but out of the action-oriented documents. The overview document, you may have that as an appendices. You may not even include it at all. There is the argument you don't need this information. And I, myself, even after 21, 22 years of doing this, I still can't really fully be convinced that I need to keep all that information over the years. I really don't. It doesn't do anything. I've got a couple of examples I may keep, but every single meeting, no. So we really don't need to have that. And I'm really not worried about all the names of people attended because, like your organization and ones that I've worked with, people change. They move on to other roles, new people come in, new lines of business changes people's positions. So all that information is just extra fluff that's not needed. So you don't need to keep any of that. If you want to keep it for audit purposes, like I said, then keep it as an appendices in the overall continuity overview document. But keep in mind, if you're doing it for tracking purposes for whatever reason, then you've got to record every meeting you have, everything you did during your continuity development, the process development phase, every meeting you had when you were creating the crisis management plan, and the IT recovery plan, the network section, the server section, anything, mainframe sections. You have to keep track of all of that, and create whatever it is you're creating to keep all that off to the side. And let's face it, after a couple of years of that, that's going to be a binder on its own. So do you really want it? Is it really going to add any value to you? You keep a couple of examples just in case, for whatever reason you're being audited and they turn around and say, well, prove that you had meetings to discuss this. Well, maybe keep a couple off to the side. I have to admit, I have been asked that, especially in my project management roles. I do get asked, prove that, you had a meeting to discuss, the development of a crisis management plan. So I just went back in my calendar, created a PDF file of the invite, and there we go, done. But they didn't ask for scores and scores and scores of every single meeting invite. So don't feel you need to include that either, Okay, so that's number 4. Meetings, schedules, attendees. They can be kept separate and keep them in the large overview document. And on that note, I think we're going to take a break before I get into the next point, because some of the next ones get a little large. So I'm going to take a break now, and I'll be right back. We're talking about 12 things not to include in your business continuity disaster recovery plans. And welcome back to Preparing for the Unexpected. Today we're talking about our business continuity plans, our disaster recovery plans, our emergency response plans, and things that we shouldn't keep in those plans. We should not be including this information in our plans. And we've already covered a couple of things: distribution lists, methodology utilized, program assumptions, and clarify again, program assumptions, not assumptions based on actions, and our meeting schedules and meeting attendees. So we're going to move on to number 5. Next is our maintenance schedule. Well, if you look at any standards that are out there and the practices and from the industry organizations, maintenance tends to have a little chunk on its own. It's kind of a topic on its own. When are we going to maintain these plans? When are we going to review them? When are we going to republish them? When are we going to test them? When are we going to plan for our tests? When are we going to have test findings? When are we going to, destroy old plans? Version control, all that kind of stuff. How we maintain, these things, how we keep them going, reviewing of names, reviewing of, positions, reviewing of contact information, emails and cell phones and things like that. There was a time when very, very few people had cell phones. It was all home numbers. Well, now you have to review because and I'm running into it, there are more cell phone numbers than people have home numbers now. So maintenance schedules, you're already going to have a plan for that off to the side somewhere. At least I hope so. You should have one, how a maintenance schedule when you're going to be reviewing the crisis management, plan. That may be January. February may be the emergency response plan. March may be, department contingency plans, and their manual processes. That information does not need to be in every single action document. Again, that's a component that's going to go into the overall business continuity program document. This is how we're going to maintain our program. Here's the schedule that we do it. And that's something you obviously have to look at every year, if not more than that, because you don't want things to go too long without actually having been reviewed. I have started to see with maintenance schedules a little bit of, if we don't have any change in a year, then we're only going to review our BIAs, our business impact analysis, every 2 years and update our plans every 2 years, but we have to test every year. So I am starting to see some sort of different ways of maintaining programs now, because not everybody's got the resources to be able to continue to do this on an annual basis, depending on what's happening within their organization. And some larger companies, though, have to do it every year because of regulations and things that are out there. So, which is fine. You adopt what is best for you as long as you're making sure that you do have a maintenance schedule. But if you've got all these different plans, you're not going to want that same schedule, that individual plan on its own, embedded into every single action-oriented plan. Keep that off to the side. It doesn't need to be in those plans. Again, can be in the overall document, the program level document. So that's number 5, the maintenance schedule. Number 6, names. Now, I know just a couple of minutes ago I said names, probably force of habit there, but in a lot of these action-oriented plans, you don't want to have names because names change continually. People move around, promotions, they just get a new role, not necessarily promotion, but a new role because of an implemented product or service. So they're no longer working in a specific area. What you should have are positions, vice president of technology or senior director of marketing, whatever the position is. That's what should be listed. If action item 13 is assigned to the director of sales, then it's your role as the business continuity professional, or whatever your title is, to make sure that the director of sales knows that they are responsible for that. You don't want to put, Bob Smith or Sally Jones is responsible for this, because if that changes, either one of those people move on, move up, move out, whatever the case may be, you're left all of a sudden with an unassigned task. So whatever that task 13 is, suddenly no one's going to know who's responsible for it, because the people who were there, the names, are gone. You want the position. The position usually stays around a lot longer than the name does. So you need to validate that. Don't use the name, and make sure you validate with the director of sales, the new one, if it's a new person, that she knows, Sally, are you aware that you are now responsible for this in our plan? And then you talk it out. You may find out she's not the right person anymore, and it could be someone else in there. It could be the manager of sales, because the director is new and is not, fully aware to be able to do that for now. So, don't put specific names, though, because they do change. They move all the time. I've seen it before where open up plans and it was full of names. And when I opened up the Outlook to send these people an email, half of them weren't there anymore. And I asked, where are these people? Oh, they're not here, they're not here, they're not here. And I said, well, half of your plan then isn't going to, get activated. And if you've got any dependencies in here, more than half of it isn't going to be activated, or actioned at all, because these people are gone. So put the positions, and then you can find out, through your org charts or through human resources or connections, whatever the case may be, find out who that person is, and then you can talk to them directly. But don't just input a name in there, because it's going to change on you. So number 6, don't include specific names. Now, as a little caveat to that, there may be something where you only have a single point of contact or a single point of knowledge, or a vendor, if you have to call a partner, a vendor, or a client, and ask for a specific name, you might have to put a specific name. And if you do, maybe ask if they've got a backup too, just in case you can't get a hold of them. But try to get away from putting specific names in your action plans. So let's move on to number 7, the document audience. This is kind of in the same line as I said with the distribution list. The document audience, this is everyone and their dog, just about. You write a plan and you send it out to everyone. Even people that would never see it. The janitors all of a sudden got the IT recovery plan. Well, the probability of the janitor ever using that plan is very, very small, I would say. That does not mean the janitor is not knowledgeable, just to clarify that. But those, some people, reviewers aren't necessarily the ones who are going to be using the plan. You don't want everyone listed in here. This is everybody who's seen this plan. Oh, whoopee-doo. Even when audit or certification bodies come along, they're going to want to know, who signed off on this and who's involved with this, who owns this. Reviewers, even in project management, well, they come and go all the time, and everybody likes to review and get their 2 cents in there. But at the end of the day, someone who changed one word or fixed a spelling mistake, they don't need to be on that list. That's not adding, a ton of value to anything. So you don't need to have a list like that, and keep in mind, the audience, isn't always the same group that has a copy of the plan anyway. Bob may have reviewed the plan, but Bob's position isn't mentioned in any of the action documents. He's not mentioned on the crisis management team. He's not involved with any of that. So why include that? You don't need it. You just want the basics, who signed off on this, because and who owns it. They're the ones whose names you're going to keep off to the side, So number 7, the document audience. Number 8, business continuity management, the disaster recovery program descriptors. Now, I have seen this, and it goes on for pages. Now, what I mean by program descriptors is a page dedicated to, this is what a BIA is. This is what a risk assessment is. This is, developing contingency plans, and this is emergency response. Not the actions, but giving us detail of what they are. You'll see that in the standards, that are out there, from various governing bodies. They describe all that stuff pretty good. Now, some of this information you may want, a paragraph or 2, but guess what? That's not in the action plan. It should be, again, in your big program document, so that you define exactly what a business impact analysis is. I know, everyone has an understanding, I hope, of what a BIA is, but different companies, have their own little spin on it, and want to put their own verbiage in there, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. You have to do what you have to do. But action-oriented plans don't need that. They don't care. If you're actioning an IT disaster recovery plan, why do you need to know what a BIA plan is? Why do you need a page telling you that? Is it offering value? And again, that answer is no, it's not. So don't incorporate that stuff in all these action plans. Have it as part of your overall program document. You may have all the different components that are in your overarching program document. You'll have a section for BIAs, and in there you may have your program assumptions. You may have a maintenance schedule for it, and you may have some assumptions there. And you may describe, this is what a BIA means to us. This is what testing means to us. This is what exercising means to us. That stuff you can keep in that document, and then you don't need to really review that over and over and over again. But if you capture all that information, all those pages, some of them, the standards are broken down into, 10, 12 specific areas. Now, can you imagine 12 different pages like that in 10 different plans? You make a change in one, and you've got to go to all the other plans and make that same change. But if you keep it in one solid location in the overall document, then you've got one page. You just need to update or review. And chances are pretty good if you never change your strategy, or definition of what a BIA is, you'll never have to change that part of the document. You've always got it. But it adds no value to someone who's going through trying to find out, when do I start the mainframe recovery? When do I do this? When do I do that? Oh, but look, here's what a BIA is. That adds no value to them. That's not going to help at all. Here's one. So that's the program descriptors. Number 9 is the document approvals. Now, I'm 50-50 on these because I don't care to have embedded PDF files of, reviewers. I don't care that, these 20 people reviewed. I would wish to see the PDF files of those who signed off on this document. All the others can go in the program document. I don't need 20 embedded PDFs in an action-oriented document. The actions, if it's for IT, the IT VP sign off, and maybe the senior director of, let's say, networking. Okay, they're the only two to go in there. You don't get all the rest. You can keep them if you want. You can keep them off to the side, but in that document, the only thing you need is who signed off on it. Reviewers, they tend to give you their approval and blessing, and that's fine. They may have been able to find a few errors, for all you know, which is fantastic. Help make the document better. But you only really want those that have gone through that document, understand it, have asked you lots of questions, have asked all the reviewers and people that help create and give the feedback to that document, make sure all their questions are answered, and they're comfortable with it before they turn around and say, yes, I sign off on this plan, or whatever your method of doing that is. It could be clicking a button in an email, it could be clicking a button in an online application, or it could actually be signing a form. I've seen that too, where they photocopy it and they just put it as an appendices in the back of the binder. So whichever suits you, fine. But you don't need everybody, under there, listed there. You just want to keep those that approve the plan, and they're usually the plan owners. And you don't usually have tons of those. Just a couple of them, and that's it. So just keep those, the rest off to the side. That's number 9, document approvals and sign-offs. Number 10, project management definition. This is kind of along the lines of the approach that I mentioned earlier on, the methodology. People don't care. You don't need to define how you created the plan, the information that be kept separately in a program document or a document that outlines how plans were to be developed. We had a meeting to determine our approach. You had a meeting to determine the meetings that you use to determine other meetings to create the plan. You don't need all of that stuff. It just doesn't matter. It adds no relevance to an actual plan. So don't keep any of that in there. It's great to incorporate, the stuff you really need in an action-oriented plan, but I consider all this stuff fluff. I use that word a lot, actually, when I talk about these sections. It's fluff. You don't need the project management or definition. What is a project? What is program management versus project management versus portfolio management? This isn't the show for that. We did have a show previously on project management with Sue Ross Baker. So if you'd like to know those definitions, please feel free to listen to that one on the site. She gave some great insight on that. But that information does not need to be in these action-oriented plans. Okay, so keep that separate as well. That's number 10, project management and definitions. And we have a couple more to go, but I think now would be a great time to take a break. And again, we're talking about 12 things not to include in your business continuity and disaster recovery plans. And we'll be right back with preparing for the unexpected. And welcome back to Preparing for the Unexpected. I'm your host, Alex Fullick, and today we're talking about 12 things not to include in your BCM or BCP or DR plans. So far, we've gone through 10 items. In the last segment, we did maintenance schedules. Number 6, names. Number 7, document audience. Number 8, the BCM or program descriptors, meaning all the various components of a BCM program and describing what each of them are. Document approvals and sign-off, at least those that are not the people who own the plans. For those that own the plans, you do want to keep, of course, so that they align, this plan was approved by this person. But all of the reviewers you don't need. And number 10, the project management and definition. You don't need to define what a project is or what a program is in portfolio. Okay? So next, we're going to move on to number 11, reporting mechanisms. Only those mechanisms you need to utilize when you're actioning the plan should be in the plan. Now, let me clarify this. You may be rebuilding a mainframe, you may be building a server, you may be doing some user validation testing. And every hour you may be required to fill out a status report or provide some sort of a status to a central point, the crisis team, and give them information on how things are going, whether it's going well, whether it's going bad, whether you're ahead of schedule, behind schedule, issues you've encountered, anything along those lines. Now, those you may have an appendices that has a form or a phone number that you're supposed to call, and you provide specific information that hopefully the plan says, provide X, Y, and Z, when you make this phone call, or send an email to ABC at such and such email account with this information in it. That stuff you may have to do and should be in your plan, because that's a part of the actioning of the plan. However, the reporting mechanisms that don't need to be in the plan are those on the program level. Every month we will do a status report and provide it to the risk committee or the finance committee or the executive committee, whatever committee, kind of helps guide, acts like a board of directors, so to speak, for your continuity program. Those things you don't need. If you do a quarterly report for the president, well, you don't need to have that in your plans. That's kept separate. Again, that kind of information you're going to want in your overall program document. This is our reporting, our progress reporting, or our status reporting. Weekly we shall do this. Monthly we shall do that. Quarterly we shall do this. For all we know, you may have a report to do for the real board of directors in your organization. Every 6 months. Those things you're going to want off to the side. They don't need to be in all these detailed plans. The reporting you do want, though, is when you need to report. Every 2 hours, I need to send a quick 2-minute voicemail, or a quick email to a committee, the crisis manager, so he knows what's going on, because, at the every 2 hours and 15 minutes, she has a conference call with all the key participants and gives them a status. So you may be required to provide that status before that. That's the kind of thing you would have in your plan, at whatever intervals are predetermined, through your discussions as you build your plans. Those you're going to need to have in there. But the big program stuff, you're not going to need to have in there. Okay? So that's number 11, reporting mechanisms. Number 12. Now, I've been talking about it through this whole thing, and I even started to hint at it at the beginning. But all that program overview documentation does not need to be in your action plans. And by that, I mean, and I've been talking about it, at the very beginning, I mentioned a huge binder, and I remember this, a huge big blue binder full of information, and very little of it was usable. So when you open up your action plans in the first 5 pages, or even less if you can do it, there has to be actions listed. This is the action, give it a number, action 1, this is the action assigned to, and if you have any dependencies, mark those. When we finish this, action 7 can get started, that kind of a thing. But you don't want to have, here's our program overview. Here's what our program is made up of. It's made up of a reporting section, a project management section, a BIA section, a risk assessment section. And you go through all of those, describing all the different pieces around them and all the various aspects, the schedules, who's reviewed each plan, all the various assumptions. Because you're going to have different assumptions anyway. Those that are in your action plans, you've got the assumptions against all the actions, like I mentioned earlier. The program assumptions, each component is going to have its own assumptions. When you're doing a BIA, you're going to have some assumptions in there. When you're testing, depending on your test, what you're testing and the level of testing. You could be doing a full simulation against a tabletop. They're going to have different assumptions. And I talked about testing 3 episodes on that recently. So if you have any questions on testing, please feel free to go back and listen to those. But all that program overview information does not need to be in these action-oriented plans. So that's number 12, program overview. Now, I'm feeling good today, so I'm going to give a bonus one. And this is one that I've seen in a plan before. Number 13, test and exercise results and corresponding documentation. Testing is a component on itself within no matter what standard you're looking at or practice guideline or industry, principles, whatever it is, no matter who's providing it, testing is always a section on its own. So it should have its own set of documents. I talked about before scope documents, the findings documents, and the everything that corresponds with your tests. This stuff does not need to be in an action-oriented document. You may be creating it, to validate these actions, but it doesn't go in the action document. And so test results, if you have let's say a large simulation exercise where you've got, multiple locations, dozens of people involved, and you find lots of issues or not, let's be positive. Let's say you didn't find any or just a couple, but no showstoppers. That information, that's all kept in its own document. A test summary document, test findings, or whatever you want to call it, executive summaries. And that's all validated against what you determined was going to be in your scope and what I called the test charter document. You validate against those. But those findings don't need to go in the action plan because a user has to make their own assumption that when they look at this plan, it's been tested, that when they were testing, they went through all these steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, however many steps are in there, that when the test was performed, they were using this action plan. When you tested the restoration and recovery of the network, and they're looking at the network restoration and recovery plan, they're assuming you tested this plan. At least you should be. That's what you should have been using when you were testing. And they go through that. But having an appendices or flipping through a page, action 22, this was tested on such and such a date, and this is what we found, it didn't work, blah, blah, blah. Well, now you've created this big paragraph for a one-line task. So the reader, the user, starts losing themselves, because what they only wanted to get was that one line. But now you've confused them by putting all this other information in there. This didn't work before. Well, you don't really want to have that beside their action step because that's not going to give them a lot of confidence, is it? You're saying, yeah, we tested this, but it didn't work. But here's your plan. Hopefully it works this time. That's not going to go over well. You don't want to have that stuff in there. And all the other documentation that goes with it. What was in scope when we tested this. It was in scope for a tabletop walkthrough, but it wasn't in scope when we did a functional end-to-end testing. A whole process. You don't want that. You don't put that stuff in there. Or there's other bits. More fluff that goes in there of where you tested. And when you tested, and under what conditions did you test, and the scenario that was used. None of that stuff adds value. And I know I may sound like I'm harping on it, but I actually came across this in somebody's continuity plan a few years back. And I was trying to follow along the plan with all the various actions that were listed, but I found myself getting lost because there was so much of this other detailed information that didn't need to be there. And I said, if you've got testing listed as a component, and as I speak, in the overview document, let's say, the big program overview that outlines all of the program components, if you've got testing as one of those components listed in there, and you've got all these tests that you've done and associated documentation, the planning stuff, the execution stuff, the documentation you capture during the test, and the findings afterwards, why is that all in here in the action-oriented document? Because you're ending up with, 1 or 2 actions per page, and it's volume now. Just because there's more in there doesn't make the plan better, right? And that actually goes for just about every single item that I've talked about. Volume doesn't equate to a better plan. If I'm a user, I want to know what I need to do right away and when I need to do it. And if there's a dependency, Sally is waiting for Bob to finish what he's doing, and when Bob is done, he lets Sally know that now she can start on something else. That's all I need to know. Action step 1, 2, and 3, and then we go. Not one page, and this is when we tested it, and here's who tested it, and what happened, and all the findings. That just adds no value. None whatsoever. It'll be confusing. I did see this in a plan, and all these actions were spread out over dozens of pages. And I said, you can condense this down to like 3-4 pages if it's just all actions, all this other stuff. And it was duplicated, by the way, in other documents. I said, what happens when you have to update this stuff? The way it is now, you've got an update, nightmare. It's all over the place. And if you're like me, you run into instances where you are updating something and you get called away for another meeting or something higher in priority comes along. Now, as you've worked through, let's say 10 plans, updating all the same information, you've got halfway, you've got 5 plans saying one thing and 5 plans saying something else. So there's no need to have duplication. And that, again, that's for every single item that I've gone through. We don't need it. So the last, the bonus, I guess I'll call it, is number 13, the test and exercise results, and the corresponding documentation. They don't need to be in these action plans. An action plan, you want to open the cover. There may be a table of contents that says, mainframe recovery, network recovery, if this is the IT disaster recovery plan, server recovery, Outlook, whatever the case may be. And they can just jump straight to that section that says, thou shalt do this, activity 1, activity 2, 3. That's what you want. That's what will make these plans worthwhile. And it doesn't, as I say, it doesn't matter if it's an online, plan or an Excel or PowerPoint or Word, whatever format you have. When you give someone an action plan, they need to be able to execute it. They're not going to be able to execute it if you put a bunch of fluff stuff in there. If you put so much wrapping around, something, people are going to give up trying to find what information it is you want them to know. And they're not going to execute properly. They'll start closing those binders, putting it off to the side, and coming up with their own activities of what they believe needs to get done because they're good people, right? These are smart, good people that want your organization, they want their organization, really, to survive the situation, the disaster, and be able to move forward. They're not going to want all of this stuff, in their way because they're all roadblocks, and speed bumps, and locked doors sometimes, that just get in people's way, preventing them from doing what it is they want to do. So let's recap what those 12 things were. Number 1, distribution lists, especially at the program level, where you're sending things to 50, 60 people. Number 2, the methodology you used, how you determined, you were creating this program and all these plans. They don't need to know that. Number 3, program assumptions. You don't need the program level. But you do need those associated with action items. Meeting schedules. You don't need that. You don't care when people met or how they met or who met. Number 5, maintenance schedule. That's a component on its own. Doesn't need to be in the plan. Names. Try to use, titles. Number 7, the document audience. Everyone may have seen that thing. It doesn't matter. Number 8, program descriptors. If you got your overview document that has a section for BIA, that's where you put the descriptor. Number 9, the document approvals and sign off. You don't need everybody's in there. You just need the one who approves it and owns the plan. Number 10, project management definition. You don't need all this. What's a project? What's a definition of this? What's a definition of that? You don't need it. Reporting mechanisms. You only need the reporting mechanisms that deal with the plans themselves and the activities. Program overview. You don't need all that information because all that information should be, that I've already gone through actually, would already be in this program overview document. So don't combine the two with an action plan. And then number 13, as a bonus, the test and exercise results and documentation. So hopefully that's given you some clear tips and guidance on how to create more actionable plans and what not to include in them. Again, I ask every week, if you do have topics you'd like to have us talk about on the show, or a specific guest, or even yourself be a guest, please send me an email. I'll be more than happy to chat with you and come up with an agenda and get your message across to help the world hear what you want to say and what your feelings are on business continuity and disasters. Could be lessons learned, could be just a new methodology or ideas you have. I'm more than willing to do that. You can send me an email at info@stone-road.com. Otherwise, I will talk to you next week. Stay prepared, everyone. Take care. If you liked that video, thumbs up. If you didn't like that video, thumbs down. But leave a message and let me know what your thoughts are. If you'd like to be a guest on the show to talk about something related to business continuity, disaster management, COVID, personal well-being, anything that's relatable to those subjects, you can reach me through my LinkedIn profile, which is in the video description. And of course, don't forget to subscribe. In the meantime, stay prepared, everybody.